All right, and thank you for joining me for the benefits of hot and cold exposure. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. And now this has to get out of the way. Sorry, 1 second. I have to move this guy. I'm struggling, hang on. Oh, yeah, there, now I can move that out of the way, and then I could do the slideshow. Okay. And from start. All right, here we go. So this is all about the metabolic biohacking of hot and cold exposure, boosting your metabolism, performance, and health span. First, we'll talk about everybody's favorite, the cold exposure. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the guy on the right, Wim Hof. He's known as the Iceman. Cold exposure has been used for many, many years for its analgesic effects. As far back, I had to put Hippocrates in there because he's Greek. But very, very commonly in places with northern climates, including the Nordic countries and Russia. And we know that this guy, Wim Hof, known as the Iceman, has popularized this for mainstream audiences, touting its benefits. So what are the benefits of cold exposure? There are so many, and I really couldn't go do an entire, all of it in the 45 minutes. But we know that it can reduce autoimmune inflammation, improves stress regulation, glucose and lipid metabolism. It decreases regular inflammation, improves your immune function, and improves your cognitive performance. Those are just a few things that it does. So what kind of modalities are there for cold exposure? Well, we have cryotherapy, cryo, the Greek for cold. You can do it locally via ice packs, or you can do whole body cryotherapy. There are chambers that are commercially available where they have very cold air and you spend 2 to 3 minutes in these chambers at a time. Or you can do some cold plunging immersion, either in an ice-filled tub, or you can buy one of these super expensive cold plunging tubs, or you can actually go into a cold body of water, which is commonly known as winter swimming, especially in the Finland area. The amount of time that you spend really depends on the temperature. The colder it is, the less time you need to spend. But even a cold shower has been found to be helpful, even as little as 30 seconds, finishing up a regular shower with 30 seconds of cold, which usually gets down to about 30 degrees or so. Sorry, not 30 degrees, 60 degrees or so for 30 seconds. So when we look at the physiology, what happens to our body when we hit a cold shock response? Well, the first thing that our body tries to do is, number one, reduce the heat loss. And then number two, increase the heat production. And number three, increase cell repair and protection for the future. And that's called hormesis. And that's super, super important in adaptation for our bodies, and part of why this is so helpful to us. So regarding a reduction of heat loss, our body does that by constricting the blood vessels on the periphery, on the outside. So that's when you'll get like the white or blue fingers and the ears and the nose. So the extremities get constricted and the blood gets shunted to the core. Heat production is thermogenesis. So the way that our body deals with cold is we need to increase temperatures. So how do we do that? Well, number one is with shivering. So that is better when you have more muscle mass, because your muscles are shivering in order to thermally increase your body temperature. But a second non-shivering way of increasing heat production is with the increase in the activation of brown fat. So we'll talk about brown fat because it's pretty fascinating. It's thermogenically active tissue. It's located in your core as opposed to a lot of fat, which might be located in the periphery or kind of around your visceral organs, the abdomen. And there is an uncoupling protein that takes the energy that is in the fat and converts it to heat. So there are three types of fat. The typical one that we know of is called the white fat. It stores energy as triglycerides and releases it as free fatty acids. Then there is brown fat, or often termed BAT, or brown adipose tissue. The reason why it's brown is that it is, when you look at it under the microscope, it is full of mitochondria, which are these powerhouses of a cell, and full of these uncoupling proteins. And that's, the mitochondria are dark, and so it makes this fat look darker in color. So when we're born, we have a large amount of this brown fat, more probably because we have a large surface area when we're younger, and so we are more likely to get cold. And so this increases our body temperature. And as we age, the amount of brown fat that we have decreases. And some people think that maybe that might have something to do with why our metabolism decreases as we age. One of the reasons. It also turns out that women have more brown fat in general than men. And the thought is perhaps because women tend to have lower muscle mass, that in order for us to do thermogenesis, we can't shiver as well as men do because we don't have as much muscle mass. And so that increases the brown adipose tissue that we have. And then there's this beige fat, which actually can go either way. You can induce it to switch from the white fat to more of a thermogenic brown fat, and that's why it's called beige. It's somewhere in between. Here's what the difference looks like, the brown adipose tissue versus the white adipose tissue, and this is when you stain stain for uncoupling protein. You can see the difference. Plus, also, the brown adipose tissue also has a lot more mitochondria in it anyway, so it looks darker in general. And the location of this is, like I mentioned, it's kind of around your heart, your liver, your spleen, your cervical area. It's trying to protect all your important blood vessels and organs. So when we look at some studies to see about how we can we increase the brown adipose tissue. So some people have less than others. Some people have very little. One of the questions was, can this be induced to increase? Because if we can, then that means that we are going to be increasing our metabolism, because this is metabolically active tissue. And in this study, 6 healthy men, and I know it's not very many people, but they wore cold suits at 50 degrees for 2 hours daily, 5 days a week for 4 weeks. Their brown fat volume activity increased by 45%, and their oxidative metabolism increased by 2.2-fold. And this is just an example. So on the left, you can see where the arrows are and where the oval is where the brown fat activated after acclimation to the cold. And the right side shows you that your oxidative metabolism with cold exposure increased. significantly. So the metabolic rate increased in the people who had cold exposure. So in this group, in this study, they took another cold exposure. This one was for 63 degrees for 2 hours every day for 6 weeks. And what they found was that, again, like similar to the previous group, if you look at these slides from 0 to 6 weeks, you'll see that you have increase in all these different subjects in their brown fat in the various locations. And then the activity of it significantly increased. But then what was super interesting also in this was that their body fat decreased compared to the control group. So they lost 1.5 pounds of body fat. They didn't have any change in their lean muscle mass. So it was just body fat went down. And their cold-induced thermogenesis increased by 58%, and that's the one on the right. So they saw very significant improvements in both body weight and thermogenesis with this. All right, this is a little bit of the biochemistry, so hang in there just real quick. So cold will stimulate cold shock proteins, and there are, sorry, my dog is getting ready to bark. There are RNA binding proteins, and there's this other binding protein that is RBM3, and it's neuroprotective. It actually regenerates damaged neurons. The other binding proteins induce anti-inflammatory mechanisms. But one of the main ways that cold affects all of these is through the stimulation of norepinephrine. Transiently, your heart rate and blood pressure go up, and it causes the constriction of the blood vessels. But norepinephrine stimulates this PGC1 alpha, which does a ton of different has a ton of different metabolic effects. It improves glucose and fatty acid metabolism, muscle fibers, and increases the production of new mitochondria. Other hormesis effects are, we mentioned mitochondrial biogenesis. So mitochondria don't just increase in your brown fat or in your beige fat, but they'll actually increase in your skeletal muscle. So now you're getting adaptations in your skeletal muscle that improve your mitochondrial number. So that actually turns into improvement in strength and speed. It improves immune response, increases natural killer cells and cytotoxic T cells, and also glucose uptake, which I'm going to show you in the next slide. So in this study, again, they did 63-degree air temperature for 2 hours. And what was great about this study was that glucose uptake, so if you look on the left, that's the brown fat on the left versus skeletal muscle. And they had control groups and the cold groups, and then they had insulin. They gave insulin to these groups as well. And the group, if you look at glucose uptake, the brown fat had higher glucose uptake than even skeletal muscle. So that was pretty impressive. Also, it stimulates antioxidants like superoxide dismutase and glutathione peroxidase, and decreases inflammation with IL-2, and increases the anti-inflammatory protein IL-10. Other benefits: improves mood and cognition. So we think that that's through norepinephrine. Low norepinephrine gives you inattention and low energy, poor mood. But as we know, cold exposure stimulates that, so that improves the mood and the focus. It also improves symptoms of depression. And that occurred with cryotherapy or with a cold shower. So cold showers were found to be helpful, even though that's, you know, much easier way to access cold therapy than to necessarily go into a cryo chamber. So we know that post-exercise cold exposure can help with muscle soreness. So it depends on the temperature. There was a meta-analysis that found that cold water immersion was best between 52 and 59 degrees for 11 to 15 minutes for recovery. Obviously, I am in that water for 2 minutes max because that was freezing. So trying to avoid hypothermia. But a lot of cyclists use this. If you look at Tour de France, you know, they're always dunking themselves in cold ice baths. Interestingly, though, we will say this: if you immediately cold expose after exercise, because you're decreasing inflammation, you may actually blunt your gains that you get from exercise. So you may not want to do it immediately after. There was a study where men had strength training for 12 weeks, and they either did cold water immersion for 10 minutes or active recovery. And in this study, since they did it immediately after the training, they decreased their gains. So on the top slide, you'll see that their quadriceps muscle mass with cold water immersion, that's the black dot, that did not increase as much as with just active recovery. And then the leg press strength and the knee extension strength, they both increased after training, but not as much when there was cold water immersion as opposed to active recovery. So when people talk about when you do your cold water immersion, the thought is space it out a little bit after your exercise. So maybe you might want to do a sauna first and then go cold plunge. And we'll talk about saunas in a bit. Obviously, dangers with extreme cold exposure, hypothermia, frostbite. There's a concept called after drop. So what this is when your skin vessels are all constricted, after you warm up and the blood vessels open up again, now all that cold blood that was on the surface of the skin now gets redirected to the core, and you have a rapid decline in your core body temperature. So again, just be very mindful of your amount of time that you're spending in these cold environments. Also, don't do it when you're intoxicated or if you have uncontrolled hypothyroidism or unstable blood pressure. So that's the cold. Now we'll talk about the heat. So this guy's bathing near a volcano lava flow, which I thought was kind of cool. History of heat exposure. We're pretty unique in that we can sweat, we can cool ourselves, and this is also great for detoxification. And the Finnish have been working with heat and sauna for thousands of years. And so they're kind of the experts. As a matter of fact, there are more saunas per capita in Finland than there are televisions. And sauna is a Finnish term meaning a bathhouse. So these guys are the experts. There are different types of saunas. There's the traditional, which is basically it's heated with a heating element. That's the one in the middle. And the air temperature gets warm, very hot, usually in the 180s or higher. And you can drop water on the coals to make the air a little bit more humid, but generally it's considered a dry sauna. Then there are infrared saunas where the temperatures don't go as high, and that heats your skin. And then there are these personal, which are also infrared, and you can, they cost a lot less money, and you can just plop yourself in there and have it be something that's more portable. So the differences between the traditional and infrared. Traditional, like I mentioned, increases the temperature of the room, which then increases the temperature of the skin. Usually it's high temperatures, 185 to 195. We have a sauna and we keep it at 195. It's duration up to 20 minutes. So studies have shown that 20, 21 minutes are usually kind of the best. If you go much higher than that, it kind of plateaus as far as improvements in all the different metabolic markers versus infrared. So infrared increases the temperature of the skin by infrared waves that your skin absorbs and increases. Those temperatures are a little lower, 125 to 155, and the duration is a little bit longer. So different metabolic changes. There are so many. Here are some. So obviously your body temperature goes up. So now you begin to sweat. When you sweat, you increase your cardiac output and your heart rate. It's actually quite similar to exercise. Your blood flow increases from the core to your skin, and your plasma volume increases because you get shunting into the plasma volume. And then you increase your heat shock proteins, which are fantastic adaptive mechanisms that help prevent. So when your body is exposed to heat, your proteins tend to denature or unravel, and heat shock proteins help to maintain the proper folding of your normal proteins. And so when your body increases your heat shock proteins because it's exposed to this heat stress, then these heat shock proteins, when you're not exposed to stress, they help in maintaining the integrity of cells even longer than what would be just from the heat stress itself. So they stay elevated for some time. Other things other effects post-heat therapy, your blood pressure goes down, your inflammation goes down, your reactive oxygen species go down. That's a good thing. Arterial stiffness goes down. Your cardiorespiratory function improves, your immune system improves. It improves nitric oxide bioactivity, which helps blood vessels dilate and reduces blood pressure that way. Other physical effects we talked about, besides lowering blood pressure, pulmonary function has been shown to be improved, so helpful in bronchitis and asthma. Joint mobility gets better. It's been helpful in rheumatoid arthritis. This also has significantly improved mood and depressive symptoms. Your endothelial function, so the function of the lining of the blood vessels improves. We talked about oxidative stress, and then also improved lipid profile and arterial compliance, which we mentioned in the previous slide. In this one study, they looked at the longevity benefits over time, and they found a lower cardiovascular mortality, all-cause premature death and dementia and Alzheimer's disease in folks who routinely sauna bathe. So this is a study looking at, it's a randomized controlled study looking at folks that were either assigned to regular exercise, exercise with a post-exercise sauna, or control group. And they did this for 8 weeks. And they found that exercise improved your cardiorespiratory fitness, which is to be expected, but exercise plus sauna actually improved it even more than just exercise. Systolic blood pressure didn't have much of an effect with exercise alone, but exercise and sauna reduced blood pressure. That's the on the right. And they even found that while exercise did not affect total cholesterol, exercise plus sauna did. So I thought that was an interesting study. So what they found, in summary, exercise improved cardiorespiratory fitness and fat mass compared to controls. Exercise with 15-minute sauna improved the cardiorespiratory fitness, blood pressure, and cholesterol. And they concluded that it is a valuable lifestyle tool that complements exercise for improving cardiorespiratory fitness and decreasing systolic blood pressure. And this is an overview of the evidence. And I thought there were some really interesting slides in here. So when they looked at the frequency of sauna bathing and the sauna duration versus sudden cardiac death hazard ratio. So in other words, when you look at these graphs and they follow people up over 25 years, the top one, so you don't want to be high on this. You don't want to have an elevated hazard ratio. You want to be low. So the lowest group was the group that had the most frequency of sauna bathing, and also that bathed for the longest amount of time. So not everybody has access to a sauna. So what about, a hot bath? Well, that helped too. There's not as much data, not as many studies showing a positive effect with this. However, when this one study followed 30,000 Japanese for 20 years and looked at their risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke. And apparently bathing is quite common in Japan, taking a hot bath. And there was a significant reduction in cardiovascular disease based on how frequently people bathed. So they concluded that it was inversely associated with the risk of cardiovascular disease. Also not associated with sudden death. So that was good. Obviously, also with heat, we need to be mindful, avoid heat stroke and hyperthermia, stay hydrated. Be careful if you have low blood pressure. If you tend to be a very heavy sweater, consider hydration repletion with electrolytes. Otherwise, you might get hyponatremic, which means that your sodium level will get too low. So, but with all of those caveats, maybe we can all start to do what the Finnish do, and we sauna bathe and ice plunge together. Alternate sauna bathing and ice plunging, and have an incredible, happy cardiovascular system, happy mood, and long life. So that is my take on it. So I am going to open this up to Anybody who has questions or comments?
Thank you so much for doing this. This is Paula, and I can tell you that there's sauna at the Y. I've never ever been in it. When I go into the ladies' locker room, I just quickly get my shower and out the door I go. But this sounds something like it'd be super easy to incorporate after a workout for 15 minutes and then jump in the shower and then follow up 30 seconds of a cold shower at the very end of my shower. I can hit it all.
Exactly. You got it. You totally got it. One thing I didn't even mention. So sometimes people are injured and they can't exercise. And the cardiovascular effects of a sauna or, hot tub, but really sauna, are almost equivalent to exercise. So in people who have limited ability to exercise, a sauna will actually get their cardiorespiratory fitness to a higher level than obviously not going in a sauna at all, but has been shown obviously to improve your cardiovascular health over a long period of time. But yeah, that's a perfect thing that you can do. 15 minutes in the sauna, then shower, then 30 seconds at the end of the shower with the cold, and then you warm up just naturally. Just let yourself warm up naturally after that.
Hey Doc, it's Jason. A real quick question for you. It's difference between steam saunas and dry saunas. Any benefit or difference?
The studies that I've looked at have been mostly with the dry saunas. So steam saunas are very high humidity. They're like 100% humidity versus the dry saunas, which are the 30 to 40%, but it actually can increase if you're dumping a bunch of the water on there. My understanding is that you can't spend as much time in the humid saunas, but that's what I know based on that. The studies that I've seen have been in the dry saunas, but it could be like a preference thing as well.
Curious because the Finnish ones are wet or steam saunas.
The Finnish ones are what? I'm sorry?
They're steam saunas.
Well, the Finnish ones, they say that they're steam, but the true steam
comes off the rocks.
Right. But that's still considered a dry sauna. I know that some people call it steam, but there's not that much steam that gets generated by this. It's still lower humidity than the humidity in the ambient air. Our humidity in what we're in right now is usually like 55, 60%. It might be on a day like today where it's really, rainy and stuff, it might be higher, it might be 65%. So compared to the humidity of the normal air, a sauna, a Finnish sauna, is only 30 to 40%. So they call it steam, but it's still a low humidity. It's still a low humidity sauna, as opposed to the official.
So it's not as steamy as I thought it was. Is your point?
It's not. It's dry. It's very dry. It's very dry. It's half as dry as the ambient amount of humidity, as opposed to real steam baths or steam saunas where it's like close to 100%. I mean, it's like foggy when you go in there.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm always thinking about my favorite topic, which is correlation versus causation.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to know that this stuff is really proven and causal. And I was just thinking about things like my brain does this. When you talk about after exercising, if you do sauna right away, it gains these extra benefits. But were they controlling? I didn't read the studies yet. Were they controlling, for example, for people who instead of going to the sauna because they don't have the sauna plan, they go eat something? Or instead of, the people in Japan who take frequent baths,
Right.
are they healthier because their lives happen to be so low stress that they have time for a bath every day?
No, I thought the same
And what's
thing.
what's the causal direction?
Yeah. So, so in one study that I looked at where they really tried, because it's hard to do a real controlled study with sauna, because you'll know like, oh, I'm in a sauna versus I'm not in the sauna. However, they did when we were looking at depression, and I didn't put this in the studies, but there was a study where they did a sham sauna session. So they raised the temperature. So they put people in this kind of in the one personal one that where the head is out, and they raised the temperature of the, you know, whatever the little sauna portable kit. But they raised it to a level that is therapeutic for half the group, and they raised it to a level that still felt hot but was not considered in the therapeutic range to the other group. And so both groups thought that they were, when they were questioned afterwards, they both thought that they were in the active group. And this was looking at depression rates. And there was a significant decrease in depression rates with the group that actually had the elevated temperature that was therapeutic versus the elevated temperature that was the sham. So in that one, you know, I thought that it was a well-controlled study. You know, a lot of these studies, they try to take into account things like other variables, right? But the one with the Japanese, I totally, you know, how do you say, well, do you have, if you're giving yourself the time to take a bath, doesn't that say a lot about you and your stress levels? So I completely agree with you. And that's one of the limitations of these observational studies, right? So, but when taken into a full, you know, the full context of all the different studies that we have out there, plus the pathophysiology of what's actually happening, you know, there's good evidence that there's benefit. So I agree with you.
I think it's all just fascinating, and thank you so much for presenting the science, which makes it believable. And you know, when you know why it's happening, it really makes sense, and it's very cool.
Yeah, thank you. I love, if you want to hear this in podcast form with somebody that's a lot more eloquent than I am in this arena. Dr. Rhonda Patrick is a PhD out of UCSD, and she has a podcast called Found My Fitness, and she does fantastic work regarding taking the sauna bathing and the cold plunging and putting it into a really like just a beautiful format that's easy to listen to. And there is a woman also, there's another podcast by Simon, oh, what the heck is his last name? It's called The Proof. Simon Hill, I think is his last name. And he does a really good one with cold plunging, a woman who's from Finland, and she wrote a book called Winter Swimming, and she's a researcher, and his interview with her is also quite fascinating. So I really highly recommend that you guys take a listen to those if you have time in your travels. It's a really good thing to listen to in the car. I find it fascinating. So, and I've been doing this myself. The cold plunging, I just started a couple of months ago, and I am definitely finding that improvement in my ability to handle cold. That's for sure. It does improve my muscle soreness after exercise. I can say that for a fact. Also, the sauna bathing that we've been doing regularly. When we went and did a camp, a triathlon training camp in Florida in March, it was quite hot, but I accidentally went on a run without my water bottles and did not feel the effects of the heat, which was surprising to me because I'm always eating a lot of water. So, you know, that's just me giving you my N of 1, but I have found that it is helpful. And so I think I'm going to get a sauna after we hang up with this from this podcast, whatever, this group Zoom. Any other questions from anyone? All right, well, if not, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. And I really appreciate you guys for being here and listening to this. And if you guys use any of these tools and have some benefits that you notice, just, you know, I'd love to hear from you and let me know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, you guys. Bye.